Good morning. Good morning, morning. Hello to anybody that's joining us straight away this morning. And on this beautiful sunny day. What a lovely day. This morning I'm going to be looking at listening to the voice of God. And I'd like to start that just by taking a few seconds just to breathe. As we need to take a few seconds to breathe in order to be able to do that. I'm going to start off by doing a little bit of looking at the learning of listening and perhaps looking at how that verses with hearing, because there are differences. There's a big difference between hearing and actually listening. The definition of hearing is inactive perception of sound. So all that's happening when we hear is that sound waves are bouncing off our eardrums and we perceive sound. Whereas the definition for listening is active, is a perception, a concentration, a gathering in of information. There is an emotional interaction with what we're hearing, and there is also response. It's a choice. It takes focus. It's an active interaction with what we're hearing. And I've been looking through the various different techniques we can learn for that. And it's not surprising there's hundreds. And there's hundreds of techniques that say there's 7 techniques and there's 10 techniques and there's different levels of listening. But I'm just going to talk about, just briefly, the main ones that came up in all of the things that I was reading, and also all of the things that I think are relevant for what I'm wanting to talk about this morning. And the first one is stop talking. If you want to listen and you want to engage with what you're listening, you need to stop talking. That's the first one. And it's easier said than done, but it's absolutely true. That's what we need to do. Stop talking. The next one is prepare yourself to listen. So get yourself comfy, sit down, be prepared, actively engage in what you're going to do. Show that you're determined. So get comfy. The other thing is, and is not as easy as it sounds, is remove distractions. And the main distraction that came up in all of the different theories was noise. It's sound. And that can be more difficult to get rid of. But also the other things that came up as distractions can be even more difficult. Things such as stress, our own concerns, overload. Those things aren't as easy for us to remove from our lives. And I think to be able to at least recognise that with those things listening is more difficult is very important. To give ourselves a break and to understand that if these things are part of the environment that we are in right now, then it is going to be more difficult to listen. But that does not mean that we can't try. And if anything I've learnt over the years is God does love a trier. And the last one is, and very importantly, I think, is be patient. We live in our lives that are so full of noise and sound and things and attractions and stimulus that we actually find it very difficult when we're in a space where those things are not happening. And it's very, very easy to, after a certain amount of time, think, I haven't heard anything, so maybe I need to fill that space. And that's very, very easy to do, but patience and waiting is all part of communication. It's all part of listening. But it's not easy. It can feel very uncomfortable. It can feel a bit boring because we're so used to filling our time and being entertained. But the advice is that regardless of all those things, that we not be tempted to fill that silence ourselves, to fill that space ourselves, to just allow it to be a space. And finally, the definition for true listening. True listening always and in every occasion requires a response. So with those little tidbits aside, I'm going to move on to just a few very short, very, very short Bible verses where hearing and listening are mentioned and the outcome of that, and how maybe we can engage with those tiny parts of text and bring them into our lives today. And the first one I'm going to look at is Samuel. And I'm only going to read a couple of verses of it. So just to give you a bit of background, Samuel's asleep and he hears a voice. So he thinks it's his mentor. So he keeps several times he hears a voice calling his name, and he continually goes to his mentor and says, "Are you calling me?" And constantly he's told, "No, I'm not calling you." So he goes back to bed and he goes back to sleep. And this happens several times until. And the Lord came and called as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel replied, "Speak, your servant is listening." And then the Lord said to Samuel. So it was only when Samuel responded and said that he was listening that God then spoke and moved forward. And then there's the clear message from God to Samuel. But nothing was said of any detail until Samuel acknowledged that he was being spoken to and said, "I am listening." Up until that point, he had heard his name being called, but it's not until 3 or 4 times later that he's ready to engage and he's listening. And then God speaks. The next one I'm going to look at is Luke 10, a very well-known story of Martha and Mary, but I'd just like to look at it in a little bit more detail, perhaps parts of it that we maybe have overlooked before, but specifically looking at them in relation to hearing and listening. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister, Mary, sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. And I'm going to stop there because that's the important bit for what I'm speaking about today. And it goes back to the techniques for listening that I spoke about a few minutes ago. There's a big difference here. Mary is showing that she's prepared to listen because she's getting comfy. She's getting comfy at the feet of Jesus. She's ready to engage. And so the word that is used is she is listening, because she's shown that she's prepared to listen, she's going to engage, and she's got comfy at the feet of Jesus. Can't imagine a more comfy place. However, her sister is distracted. So her sister has not attempted to remove all of those distractions and is not willing to remove those distractions because important jobs need to be done. So Martha could very well be hearing what Jesus is saying, but she's not listening to what Jesus is saying. She's hearing the sounds, but they're bouncing off. There's no engagement. There's no commitment to listening. There is the distraction of the busyness of the day, and she's unable to move away from that to a place of active listening where Mary is. And Jesus goes on to say, there is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken from her. I think we've all got a lot to learn from that, when it's so easy to find justification for the importance of our distraction and the busyness and things that need doing, so we must do them. It's very, very easy to be caught up in those things as excuses to not listen. And finally, and my favourite in the ones that I've chosen for this morning, is Revelation. And it is where, of course, Jesus says that I am at the door. But I'd like to just, again, specifically look at the words that are used and actually highlight something that I'd never read before and I'd missed before, which I find absolutely wonderful and a really wonderful part of these verses. Look, I stand at the door and knock. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends. So first of all, I'm going to look at the theme for today, which is that Jesus is making a noise at the door. He's knocking. He's making a sound. And the word here, firstly, is if you hear my voice. So at that particular time, Jesus is talking about hearing. And many people have heard the knock and the voice. But this next part is what takes it from hearing, moving forward to listening. Because, as I said before, active listening requires a response. And what Jesus is saying is, if you hear and open the door, which is an active response. So you are saying, I've heard and I am listening. I'm responding. I'm actively engaging in what I've heard, which does not happen for everyone. Many hear, but it's the response that Jesus is looking for. It's the active response of opening the door. Then he says, I will come in. And this next part is a part that I have never really read before. We've all heard many, many times the story of Jesus knocking on the door and us opening the door, but I have never read these words before, and I think they're absolutely wonderful. I will come in and we will share a meal together as friends. How wonderful is that? That we won't only just share a meal together, but if you hear my voice and you respond and you actively engage, we're going to sit down together, we're going to eat together, and we're going to be friends. That almost wipes away all of the other things that we're talking about this morning. But I don't want to overlook it because I think those words are wonderful and are so key. That here Jesus is saying that if you do listen, if you do engage, we're going to be friends. We're going to sit down. We're going to talk together. We're going to be comfortable with each other. We're going to chill. We're going to relax. We're going to eat together. We're going to be friends. And that's, of course, what we do with friends. Real friends. We listen. And so what I'd like to do now is move on to what has brought all this into mind this morning and where this focus has come from. But first of all, I would like to just say, let's just take a moment to think and to offer ourselves and our minds and our bodies and our time and just engage with the thought of true listening and how that is different from just hearing. And I'm probably going to finish a little bit earlier this morning, but I don't want to carry on after reading what I'm about to read. I want to just let it settle, and I want that to be the end of this morning. So what I'm going to read from this morning is a little book called Prayers on Fire. And when I read today's verse, it inspired me for today. And so I hope that it will inspire you too. So today's verse and prayer is entitled Your Voice. And the theme is Psalm 85, verse 8. Now I'll listen carefully for your voice and wait to hear whatever you say. Let me hear your promise of peace, the message every one of your godly lovers longs to hear. Just don't let us in our ignorance turn back from following you. When you speak to me, everything changes. My entire world becomes lighter, less precious, less precarious. Your voice releases peace, unlocking the chains of stress and illuminating the darkened corners of my life. Help me to quiet my soul so I can hear you more clearly. I yearn for the whispers that inflame my being, but I also long for thunderous roars of majesty. When you sing your songs of love over me, I sense it in every cell. Counsel me with your perfect wisdom and infuse me with confidence as I follow your instructions. When you knock upon the door of my heart, may I answer immediately, never overthinking. As I lay my head to rest at night, fill my dreams with divine conversations and glorious illustrations of your love. When the sunlight wakes the dawn, pierce my heart with your revelation. I'm listening, Lord. Speak to me. Have a blessed day. I'm going to leave you there. I know it's early, but I want to leave you with that. I will put those verses from the Prayers on Fire onto St. George's site, Facebook site. Be blessed. Listen. Have a lovely day. Amen. I can't log out. Here we go.